Matthew 5:13 through 20. You are the salt of the earth. But what if the salt were to lose its flavor? How could you restore it? Would it be fit for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot? You are the light of the world. You don't build a city on a hill, then try to hide it, do you? You don't light a lamp, then put it under a bushel basket, do you? No. You set it on a stand where it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, your light must shine before others, so that they may see your good acts and give praise to your Abba God in heaven. Don't think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. The truth is, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter of the law, not even the smallest part of a letter, will be done away with until it is all fulfilled. That's why whoever breaks the least significant of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever fulfills and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. I tell you, unless your sense of justice surpasses that of the religious scholars and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. La palabra de Dios. Gracias a Dios.
Here's our modern sacred text. I just noticed this morning with Alison's help. Take note of the shape of the poem, too, in its lines. Arborescent 1 by Amanda Gorman. We are arborescent. What goes unseen is at the very root of ourselves. Distance can distort our deepest sense of who we are, leave us warped and wasted as winter's wind. We will not walk from what we've borne. We would keep it for a while, sit silent and swinging on its branches, like a child refusing to come home. We would keep. We would weep, knowing how we would, again, give up our world for this one.
Before I start speaking, I want to share with anybody who would need to know that I'm going to be talking about pregnancy, fertility, female reproductive body parts in this sermon. And this could be a challenging topic sometimes for folks around pregnancy and around fertility. And so just wanted folks to have that heads up. Prepare yourself to step out if you need to. So on my phone, if anyone wants to see it after service, there is a photo of me. I'm 8.5 months pregnant. I'm lying face up and upside down on an ironing board, not backwards like this. And the ironing board is at a 45-degree angle from the couch to the floor. And I'm smiling, I'm holding my belly, and I'm aware of kind of how silly this is. But if you look into my eyes, you will see an almost obsessive glint in my eyes. I'm ready for something, I'm working on it. You see, our sweet Hanel was what they call a breech baby. And instead of his head pointing down toward the ground, it was nestled high up in almost in my rib cage. And his bottom was toward the ground and his legs were like piked up right in front of his face. And actually, after he was born, when we would swaddle him like that. Because that's how he was comfortable. And what I was trying to accomplish when I was like laying back, what they said would happen, maybe, is that kind of the gravity of it would help him to want to move his head so that he would flip. I did more than just this 45-degree angle maneuver. I did to try to get him to flip. I did acupuncture appointments on the regular. I had chiropractic adjustments. I had more exercises and stretches and practiced a traditional Chinese medicine strategy called moxibustion, where you take actually a cone of mugwort and you burn it at energy points on your toes to see if it will move the energy in your body to flip the baby. Our baby did not flip. If you had asked me when I'd first gotten pregnant, I would not have told you that a vaginal birth was all that important to me. But as the due date approached, I employed these strategies at an increasingly urgent pace, knowing that the only other option for me would be a C-section. At 37 weeks, 3 weeks shy of the due date, Brian and I decided to schedule kind of the mother of all attempts to get a baby to flip, called an external cephalic version. An aversion is a procedure. It takes place in the operating room on the delivery ward, just in case of an emergency C-section. And they give you a spinal tap to numb you from the ribs down. And then basically the doctors just push really hard on your belly, really hard on your baby to try to flip the baby. And the doctors pushed and they pushed, and I could feel Hanel inside of me resisting them. His head stayed close to my heart, and at the end, this kiddo is not gonna budge. That evening, Brian and I sat and talked in our backyard, and the sun made its long golden path to the horizon because it was almost, it was summer, long, long evenings of summer. And we decided that night not to try another version. Some people do many versions to see if the baby will flip. And as I continued to insist to Brian and to myself that really I would be okay with a C-section, no problem, no problem, I began to feel those harder emotions well up inside of me. And I resisted them. It was ridiculous. I am such a privilege. It was such a privileged and entitled thing I felt to be sad about. Not being able to give birth to my baby vaginally. I had access to all the resources I needed in my able-bodied body of an upper middle class, white, cis woman with insurance in America. I would be able to bring my baby safely into the world. I should be grateful, right? Not crushed, no. But I was crushed. And inside of my body was just grief. It was just there. I wanted to give birth. I didn't want to have my baby pulled from a wound in my belly. I wanted to labor and breathe and struggle and deliver new life into the world. But that's not how it was going to go. And it's not how it went. But to really feel the gratitude at having access to a safe way to bring our child into the world and to have any joy giving birth via C-section, I had to grieve it first. To move through anything, not to get stuck, grief must find a way out. Amanda Gorman writes, "We will not walk from what we've borne. We would keep it for a while. Sit silent and swinging on its branches, like a child refusing to come home." Gorman's poem, Arborescent, was published in her 2021 book, Call Us What We Carry, and it speaks to a grief born of a world changed by a pandemic. She writes, "Distance can distort our deepest sense of who we are, leave us warped and wasted as winter's wind." Distance can distort our deepest sense of who we are. Distance from one another. I remember how early on in the pandemic, I was having the reflection that the one thing that we could do to keep each other safe is to stay as far apart from each other as we possibly could. How the virus grew and spread was based on our contact with one another, which is maybe one of the most human things of all, gathering together. And maybe just because it's my full-time job right now to try to learn like every single thing I can about you all, I couldn't help but wonder how this community must have been impacted by that virus and by the separation caused by that virus. Lesson number one I've been learning about Salt and Light and about Leaven community is that you all are deeply rooted in relationship with one another. Gorman's poem says, "What goes unseen is at the very root of ourselves." We can't really see a relationship, but we are rooted in them. We see the evidence of it, we observe actions and behavior, but the relationship itself is an energy. It generates a sensation that we feel in our bodies. To lose so many relationships all at once, at least to lose the way that we express them through gathering, all of us, the whole world over, we're all still making sense of it. And Annalisa, the first day that we met, she gave me a notebook that on the front cover says, "We are all connected." And I'm using it, as she suggested, to take notes after one-to-ones with each of you. Trying to remember. This phrase, "we are all connected," used to give me warm, fuzzy feels. Is something sort of remote and intangible, but warm, like 6 degrees of separation. But after the last several years, in this time of viral overwhelm and ecological crisis and racial reckoning and economic instability and democratic collapse and global socio-political conflict, I feel in my body a totally different way how my connectedness is closely intertwined with someone on the other side of the planet. Knowing and feeling are different. It's like this. We know the reality of climate change, but we feel it differently after living in the smoke and the orange-gray glow of our city being surrounded by wildfire. We see the invasion and the war in Ukraine, but we feel it differently living as neighbors with Ukrainian refugees. We understand intellectually how our political system is fraying, but we feel it differently when the National Guard comes to patrol the streets of our city. It's different when we feel it. What goes unseen is actually at the very root of ourselves. So here's the story then that I've been constructing so far about Salt and Light. And I'm glad that we get to do one-to-ones, because then you can tell me what I'm getting wrong about the story. Because I'm sure there are things, absolutely. All of us were impacted by all of these events at an individual level, but small communities like this one, even more so. One thing that's unique about you all at Salt and Light is that you already had a story about yourselves of spiritual resilience, of sacred experimentation, of death and life and resurrection in the death of Redeemer and the birth of Salt and Light and Leaven. And it's a story that's bigger than just what you hold together here, because it's a story that's also known by the broader community, by the national ELCA community. There's been a book written about this community. That's a lot to live up to. That's a lot to live up to. When the deep organizing relationships that we've held in the past seem to have eroded in the wake of the pandemic. It's a lot to live up to when we don't even know what's going to happen next week, when maybe we don't even know yet how we're going to fix the lock on our front doors. It's a lot to live up to. But here's the good news. One thing I do know is that we don't have to live up to anything. I have a hunch that we are in the process right now of trying to get that exact version of this story back. Still trying to find a way to do all the things the way we used to do them. We're laying backwards, upside down, 3 times a day. We're lighting cones of herbs on our toes. We're consenting to doctors to push our belly hard, trying to get this to flip. But back there isn't coming back. Not for Salt and Light, and not for any of us. It can't be exactly the way that it was before. I have a hunch that our only task right now is to grieve back there. And we can't just grieve alone. Perhaps many of us already have grieved by ourselves this reality. We have to engage the collective grief. We have to engage collectively together our grief from the last 3 years. Because we are one body. We can't do it in private. So it feels serendipitous then that as I've been listening and trying to gather information and construct a story about Salt and Light Lutheran Church, that the text that emerged in the lectionary today is, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." I didn't pick the text. For folks who aren't familiar, the lectionary is like this calendar. It's a 3-year calendar of the church liturgical season, and the texts are picked for us. This just happened to be the text in the lectionary today. So let's get into it. The text is in the Gospel of Matthew, likely written about 50 years after Jesus' death, and it was written to an audience that was primarily Jewish. The author seems especially interested in tying the story of Jesus to stories from the Hebrew Bible, and emphasizing in particular the importance of Jewish law. This is why the end of the passage today talks about being even more committed to the law than the Pharisees and the scribes, because speaking to a primarily Jewish audience, the author of the text wanted folks to know, yes, a new world is here, a new iteration is here, but we still have to follow the law. The text also comes right at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. So this means that within the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is born, we have the Christmas story, we have Jesus wandering in the wilderness, grappling with the devil. We have Jesus's baptism, and then when he is ready to start his ministry, the first thing he does is he goes up on the mountain, much like Moses did after wandering for 40 years in the desert, like Jesus's 40 days. Go up on the mountain and deliver his first teachings. It begins with the Beatitudes, which Jules preached on last week. And then he says, "You all are salt of the earth, light of the world," and saying, your job is for all of that to shine forth. And then he goes on to give us 3 chapters of the law and tells us what to do. Like turn the other cheek and some other really cool stuff in there. But this is about that momentum of being followers of Jesus means we have a purpose. It means we show up in that way of integrity. So a few things strike me about both salt and light in this passage. 2 things. 1, both salt and light do not require large quantities to have an impact. They're small, but they're potent. Just a dash of salt brings out the complexity and flavor in a dish. And a dark room is illuminated by a single candle. Sometimes we can be really concerned with quantity. with work production, with task completion, maybe with Sunday morning attendance. Capitalism has trained us well, my friends. But what matters at the heart of things is quality. How are we showing up to each other? How are we showing up to this world? How bright is our light? How strong is our seasoning? And speaking of quantity, in fact, maybe too much salt and light can be a real thing. No one wants to eat a super salty soup. Too much light turns into a destructive fire. I think the point here is not about growth or evangelism or spreading the gospel. I think it's about, for those who follow Jesus' teachings, to do so with integrity and rigor. That's one. Two is that despite Matthew's concern with action, with people's faith having a real impact, the interesting thing about salt and light, like we talked about in the children's wondering time, is that they don't have a to-do list. They simply are what they are. They create change through their being what they are. What else can light do but shine? Can salt do anything but season? I might even add, what can leavening do but rise? There's no strategic plan, there's no scrum master, no anxiety about not doing enough. The doing is intertwined with the being, what they are. Salt gives flavor just by being what it is. Light illuminates as its most basic function. The sun just rises each morning. It doesn't plan to rise. There's nothing to do, nothing to work at, just to be, and let that being guide the doing. Now, I don't mean to sniff at strategic plans. I love a good plan. I do think we need a good plan, but the planning follows the being. Like Levin's mission says, be, love, and act. So the thing to do now is just to be together, to take joy in these relationships and the people gathered here, to focus on loving in community, and when the moment calls for it, to do the work of grieving in community. 3.5 years ago, I desperately wanted to physically give birth with my body, and that's not how it went. Hanel's birthday was an ethereal, luminous moment in that liminal place between life and not life. His body separated from mine, and the cord was broken, and I finally got to see his face and hold his body. My God. But to feel all that transcendent joy, I had to grieve what his birth couldn't be. We still all need to grieve what couldn't be in the pandemic and all that followed. Without the grief, we will get stuck in a cycle of trying, in a hamster wheel of tasks and doing and planning, when all there is to do is just to be who we are. So I don't really know what this looks like yet. Some of you probably have ideas. Anyone who's ever grieved will tell you that it's not rational, it's not linear. But I suspect that how we grieve together lies in what is unseen. We'll feel it in our bodies, in our relationships, at the root of us. We will not walk from what we've borne. Instead, we'll keep it for a while. We would keep and we would weep, knowing how we would again give up our world for this one. Amen. So one of the values that we hold as a community is that we honor the wisdom of the gathered community alongside the wisdom of the scripture and the preacher. As part of Leaven Community, we'd like to invite you into 2 practices of sacred organizing that help us make meaning and deepen relationships. One is the practice of reflection, and one is the practice of the one-to-one conversation. I love it. So beautiful. And we want to emphasize there's never an obligation to participate in these one-to-one conversations, only an invitation. If you're interested in meeting with 1 or maybe 2 other people to reflect on the scripture and the sermon or story that was shared, stay in the sanctuary and we'll have about 5 minutes to chat. Maybe 7. I don't know. What do you think? I heard a murmur. 2 minutes? Up, down? What's that? More? More is more. Okay, we'll go 10 minutes. 10. All right. Okay. I love it. Okay. If you so we'll do 10 minutes and I'm going to give your question very soon. And if you're on Zoom, you're welcome to stay in the main room and share with each other. The question that I put to you, but also you can take things emergently and speak what's on your heart. But the question that I would ask of folks, whether you have been a part of this community in the pandemic or not, we've all moved through the pandemic. What do you need to let go of? What might you need to grieve? Like to simply be. To be your salty self. Okay, so we'll take 10 minutes and you can turn to a neighbor and chat.